Before we begin, I want to thank you all for being here tonight. If you like my stories, please consider giving me like and subscribe. It means the whole world to me. Enjoy the stories, and I hope you get the scare you're looking for. The house on Maple Street stood at the edge of town, its sagging roof and peeling paint a silent warning to anyone who passed by. Most people avoided it, crossing the street to escape its shadow. They whispered about the family who lived there decades ago, a mother, a father, and their young daughter, all gone one night without a trace. Some said they were murdered, others that they fled from something unspeakable. The truth was buried with the dust that coated the house's warped floorboards. I didn't believe the stories. I was a rational man, a contractor hired to gut the place and make it sellable. Just another job, I told myself, as I pulled into the overgrown driveway, my truck's engine coughing in the still air. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty foyer. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with the smell of mildew and something sharper like rust or old blood. My boots crunched on broken glass and I swept my flashlight across the room. The beam caught faded wallpaper curling from the walls, exposing raw wood beneath. Furniture lay scattered, chairs overturned, a dining table split down the middle as if struck by an axe. I chalked it up to vandals. Kids had probably been sneaking in for years, daring each other to spend a night in the haunted house. I wasn't here to solve mysteries. I was here to work. I started in the kitchen, prying up linoleum that stuck to the floor like skin. The cabinets were empty, their doors hanging off hinges. But I found a child's drawing wedged behind one, a crude sketch of a family, 3 stick figures holding hands under a black scribbled sky. The daughter's figure had no face, just a blank oval where her head should have been. I tossed it aside, unnerved but unwilling to dwell on it. The house was old, and old houses held echoes of their past. That was all. As I worked, the silence grew oppressive. No birds chirped outside, no wind rattled the windows. The only sound was my own breathing and the occasional groan of the house settling. By late afternoon, I'd moved to the upstairs hallway, tearing out rotted baseboards. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping, like fingernails on wood, coming from the end of the hall. I froze, my hammer raised mid-swing. The sound stopped, then started again, deliberate, rhythmic, tap, tap, tap. I told myself it was pipes, or maybe an animal trapped in the walls. I wasn't the type to jump at shadows, but my skin prickled as I followed the sound to a door at the hall's end. The door was locked, its brass knob cold under my hand. I jiggled it, but it wouldn't budge. The tapping grew louder, faster, now coming from inside the room. I called out, half expecting a squatter or a raccoon to answer, but there was only silence, then the tapping again, insistent. I grabbed my crowbar from the toolbox and wedged it into the door frame. The wood splintered and the door swung open, revealing a small bedroom. It was empty except for a single chair in the center, facing a cracked mirror on the far wall. The tapping stopped the moment I stepped inside. I crossed the room, my reflection distorted in the mirror's warped glass. My face looked wrong, eyes too wide, mouth stretched in a way that wasn't mine. I blinked, and the reflection normalized. But my pulse was racing. I turned away, ready to leave, when I noticed scratches on the chair's backrest, deep and uneven, like someone had clawed at it in a frenzy. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the splintered wood. Something about the room felt alive, as if the walls were watching me. I left quickly, locking the door behind me, though I knew the lock was broken. I told myself I'd deal with it tomorrow. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that faceless stick figure from the drawing, its blank head staring at me. I told myself it was just the house getting under my skin, but when I closed my eyes, I heard the tapping again, faint but unmistakable, like it had followed me home. I got up, checked the windows, the doors, nothing. Just my imagination, I insisted, but I didn't go back to sleep. The next day, I returned to the house, determined to shake off the unease. I focused on the basement, a damp, cavernous space with concrete walls and a dirt floor in one corner. The air down there was colder, heavier, and my flashlight flickered as I descended the stairs. I found old boxes filled with junk, rusted tools, moth-eaten clothes, a doll with one eye missing. I was about to head back upstairs when I noticed a patch of dirt in the corner, darker than the rest, as if it had been recently disturbed. I grabbed a shovel and started digging, telling myself I was looking for pipes or wiring, but deep down, I knew it was something else. A foot down, the shovel hit something hard. I knelt, brushing away the dirt to reveal a small wooden box, its lid carved with the same stick figure family from the drawing. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a lock of hair, brittle and yellowed, tied with a red ribbon and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it to find a letter, written in a child's scrawl. "They're in the walls. They won't let us leave." My stomach twisted. I shoved the box into my bag, not wanting to touch it any longer, and climbed the stairs, my flashlight flickering again. The basement door slammed shut before I reached it. I pounded on the door, shouting, but it wouldn't move. The air grew colder, and I heard it again, the tapping, now all around me, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. I swung my flashlight, its beam catching nothing but shadows that seemed to writhe at the edges. Then a whisper, so soft I thought I'd imagined it. "Stay with us." I threw my weight against the door, and it gave way, sending me sprawling into the kitchen. I didn't look back as I grabbed my bag and ran to my truck, the house looming behind me like a predator. I didn't return for 2 days. I told myself I was done, that no job was worth this. But the box sat on my kitchen table, its presence like a splinter in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about the letter, the hair, the tapping. I needed answers. On the 3rd day, I went back, armed with a flashlight, a crowbar, and a resolve I didn't feel. The house was waiting for me, its windows dark, its silence heavier than before. I went straight to the upstairs bedroom, the one with the chair and the mirror. The door was open now, though I'd left it locked. The chair was gone, but the mirror was still there, its surface gleaming unnaturally in the dim light. I approached it, my reflection clearer this time, but something was wrong. My shadow didn't move when I did. It stood still, its head tilted slightly, watching me. I stepped back, and the shadow stepped forward, out of the mirror, its form solidifying into a figure. Me, but not me. Its eyes were black, its mouth a jagged grin. I swung the crowbar, shattering the mirror, but the figure didn't vanish. It lunged, and I stumbled back, falling through the doorway. The door slammed shut, trapping me in the hall. The tapping started again, louder, faster, now accompanied by whispers, overlapping, unintelligible, but unmistakably angry. I ran downstairs, the house creaking and groaning as if it were alive, its walls closing in. In the kitchen, I saw them, shadows moving in the corners, shapes that weren't human, their limbs too long, their heads featureless. I bolted for the front door, but it wouldn't open. The windows wouldn't break. The house wouldn't let me leave. Panic took over. I grabbed the box from my bag, thinking maybe it held the key to whatever was happening. I opened it again, and the lock of hair was gone, replaced by a single photograph. It showed the family, the mother, father, and daughter, standing in front of the house. Their faces were scratched out, but the daughter's was different, not scratched, but blurred, as if she'd moved when the photo was taken. Behind them, in the window, was another figure, tall and thin, its face a blank oval. My hands shook as I realized the figure was standing behind me now, its breath cold on my neck. I dropped the photo and ran to the basement, the only place I hadn't fully explored. The dirt patch was gone, replaced by a hole, deep and black, as if it led to nowhere. The whispers were louder now, coming from the hole, calling my name. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I leaned over the edge, my flashlight illuminating nothing but darkness. Then, hands grabbed me, cold, bony hands, pulling me down. I screamed, thrashing, but they were too strong. I fell, the world disappearing into black. When I woke, I was in the bedroom again, the chair back in its place, the mirror whole. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't me. It was the daughter, her face blank, her eyes hollow. She spoke, her voice a whisper that echoed in my skull. "You found us. Now you stay." I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. The walls pulsed, the tapping now a heartbeat, and I realized the house wasn't empty. It was alive, and it had claimed the family, just as it was claiming me. Days passed, or maybe hours. Time didn't exist in the house. I was trapped, my body moving without my will, Forced to wander the halls, to sit in the chair, to stare into the mirror, the shadows were always there, watching, whispering. I saw the family sometimes, their faces blank, their hands reaching for me. I understood now. They hadn't vanished. They were part of the house, their souls woven into its walls, its floors, its mirrors. And now, so was I. But there was a twist, one I hadn't seen coming. The house wasn't just a trap. It was a prison, built to hold something older, something worse. The family, the daughter, the shadows, they weren't the threat. They were victims, like me, bound to keep it contained. Every night I felt it stirring in the basement, in that black hole, its hunger growing. The house needed me, needed us, to keep it locked away. The wind howled through the skeletal trees, clawing at the windows of the old house on the hill. Emma stood at the edge of the gravel path, her breath visible in the frigid night air, staring up at the looming structure. The house was a relic, its warped wooden siding peeling like dead skin, the windows dark and hollow like eyes that had seen too much. She clutched her flashlight, its beam cutting a weak slice through the oppressive darkness. She'd come here on a dare, a stupid bet with her friends, but now, standing alone, the weight of her decision pressed against her chest. The dare was simple: spend the night in the abandoned Miller house, the one nobody talked about except in whispers, the one where the Miller family had vanished decades ago, leaving behind nothing but rumors of madness and blood. Emma wasn't superstitious. She laughed at ghost stories and rolled her eyes at horror movies. But something about this place felt wrong. The air was too heavy, the silence too loud. She shook off the unease and stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning under her weight like a warning. The front door was ajar, swaying slightly as if inviting her in. She pushed it open, the hinges screaming in protest, and stepped inside. The smell hit her first, damp rot and something metallic, sharp like old pennies. Her flashlight swept across the foyer, illuminating dust-covered furniture and cobwebs that shimmered like silver thread. The air was colder inside, unnaturally so, and her skin prickled as she moved deeper into the house. The living room was frozen in time, a sagging couch, a cracked coffee table, a fireplace filled with ash that looked disturbingly fresh. She paused, her beam catching on a faded photograph on the mantel. A family of 4, smiling, their eyes too wide, too bright. Emma's heart thudded as she climbed the staircase, each step creaking louder than the last. The second floor was a maze of narrow hallways and closed doors, the kind of layout that made you feel like you were being watched. She chose a door at random, her hand trembling as she turned the knob. The room beyond was a child's bedroom, the walls papered in faded flowers. A small bed sat in the corner, its sheets yellowed but neatly made. Toys were scattered across the floor, a doll with one eye missing, a wooden train, a music box that gleamed dully in the flashlight's glow. She stepped inside, her curiosity overriding her fear, and nudged the music box with her foot. It sprang to life, a tinny melody filling the room, slow and warped, like a lullaby sung by something not human. She froze. The melody wasn't coming from the music box alone. It was echoing from somewhere deeper in the house, a faint, distorted hum, rising and falling like a distant scream. She slammed the music box shut, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, until it seemed to vibrate in her bones. She backed out of the room, her flashlight shaking in her grip, and the door slammed shut behind her with a force that rattled the walls. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't touched the door. The hallway was darker now, the shadows thicker, as if the light was being swallowed. She forced herself to move, her sneakers squeaking against the warped floorboards. The humming followed her, weaving through the walls, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, like a voice trying to form words. She reached the end of the hallway, where a single door stood, different from the others. It was heavy, made of dark wood, with a brass knob that looked polished, untouched by time. Her hand hovered over it, every instinct screaming at her to run, but something, some sick magnetic pull, made her turn the knob. The door opened to a staircase descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was colder, wetter, carrying that same metallic scent, stronger now. She took a step back, but the humming surged, filling her head, drowning out her thoughts. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a command. Her legs moved against her will, carrying her down the stairs, each step echoing like a heartbeat. The flashlight flickered, its beam growing weaker, but she could make out the outlines of a basement. Stone walls, a dirt floor, and something in the center of the room shrouded in shadow. As her eyes adjusted, she saw it. A large, rusted metal table, its surface stained with dark, uneven patches. Chains hung from its edges, coiled like snakes. Her stomach churned, but she couldn't look away. The humming was deafening now, coming from everywhere and nowhere, and she realized with a jolt that it wasn't just in her head. It was in the room, in the walls, in the air. Something was here with her. She stumbled backward, her flashlight finally dying, plunging her into total darkness. Her hands fumbled for her phone, but it was dead too, its screen black no matter how many times she pressed the power button. Panic clawed at her chest as she groped for the stairs, but her hands met only cold stone. The layout had changed, or she had. The humming stopped abruptly, replaced by a new sound, slow, deliberate footsteps circling her in the dark. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The footsteps paused, and then a voice answered, low and rasping, so close she felt its breath on her neck. "You shouldn't be here," she screamed, lurching forward, her hands scraping against the dirt floor. The footsteps resumed, faster now, circling tighter. She crawled blindly, her fingers brushing against something soft and cold. A hand. She yanked her arm back, her scream choking in her throat. The voice came again, closer, almost inside her ear. "They never leave." Light flared suddenly, blinding her. She blinked, her vision swimming, and found herself back in the child's bedroom, sprawled on the floor. The music box was open, playing its warped lullaby. The door was closed, the flashlight in her hand glowing steadily as if it had never failed. Her heart pounded as she scrambled to her feet, her mind reeling. Had she imagined the basement? The voice? The hand? She didn't wait to find out. She bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. She pounded on it, screaming, but the wood felt solid as stone. The music box stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Then, from behind her, a child's giggle. She spun around, her flashlight catching the doll in the corner, its one eye glinting. It was sitting upright now, its head tilted as if watching her. She backed away, her breath hitching, and the giggle came again, not from the doll, but from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, the air growing colder. She turned back to the door, desperate, and saw something that made her blood freeze. A shadow, tall and formless, stretching across the wall, moving closer. She didn't think. She grabbed the music box and hurled it at the door, the wood splintering under the impact. The door flew open and she ran, the giggle chasing her down the hallway, joined by whispers now, overlapping, unintelligible, but unmistakably angry. She stumbled down the stairs, her hands scraping against the banister, and burst into the living room. The front door was still open, the night air beckoning, but as she sprinted toward it, the door slammed shut with a force that shook the house. She skidded to a stop, her chest heaving. The whispers were louder now, forming words she could almost understand. "Stay," they hissed. "Join us." She spun around, her flashlight sweeping the room, and froze. The photograph on the mantel was different. The family was still there, but a fifth figure stood behind them, her. Her face, her clothes, her terrified expression, mirrored perfectly in the faded sepia. She backed away, her mind screaming that it was impossible, but the whispers grew louder, angrier, and the air was so cold it burned her lungs. She turned to the fireplace, desperate for another way out, and saw something move in the ash. A hand, pale and bony, reached out, its fingers curling toward her. She screamed, stumbling backward, and the room erupted into chaos. The furniture rattled, the windows shook, and the whispers became a deafening roar. She threw herself at the front door, pounding on it, sobbing, until it finally gave way, swinging open into the night. She ran, the gravel crunching under her feet, the wind tearing at her clothes. She didn't stop until she reached the bottom of the hill, collapsing in the grass, her body shaking. The house loomed above her, its windows dark but alive, watching. She fumbled for her phone, praying it would work now, and it did. The screen lit up, showing a single notification, a photo taken in the child's bedroom. It showed her standing in front of the music box, her face pale, her eyes wide. But she hadn't taken any photos. Her blood ran cold as she zoomed in. Behind her, in the corner of the room, stood the doll. Its one eye was gone, replaced by a real one, human and bloodshot, staring directly at the camera. The phone slipped from her hands, and from the hill she heard it. The music box playing its lullaby, calling her back. The wind howled through the dense forest, clawing at the old cabin where Sarah had sought refuge. She'd been driving for hours, fleeing the city and the suffocating weight of her unraveling life, when her car sputtered to a stop on a desolate road. The cabin, half hidden by gnarled pines, was the only shelter for miles. Its weathered wood and cracked windows screamed abandonment, but the storm brewing outside left her no choice. She pushed open the creaking door, the air inside thick with dust and the faint, sour tang of decay. Her flashlight beam danced across the room, revealing a sagging couch, a rusted stove, and a single photograph on the mantel. A family, their faces blurred by time, staring blankly into the lens. Something about the image made her stomach twist, but she shook it off. She was tired, jumpy, nothing more. Sarah set her bag down and tried to ignore the oppressive silence, broken only by the storm's distant rumble. She'd stay the night, wait for the rain to pass, and find help in the morning. The cabin was cold, but she found a stack of brittle firewood by the hearth. As she knelt to build a fire, a sharp creak echoed from the back of the cabin. She froze, her breath catching. It was just the wind, she told herself, or the house settling. Old places made noises. Still, her hands trembled as she struck a match, the flame casting flickering shadows that seemed to writhe on the walls. She sat on the couch, pulling her jacket tight, and tried to focus on the fire's crackle. But the creak came again, sharper this time, deliberate, like footsteps on warped floorboards. Her heart thudded. She grabbed the flashlight and stood, sweeping the beam toward the dark hallway beyond the living room. The light caught nothing but peeling wallpaper and cobwebs. "Hello?" she called, her voice thin, swallowed by the cabin's stillness. No answer. She forced a laugh, scolding herself for being paranoid. She was alone. She had to be. But as she turned back to the fire, a faint whisper brushed her ear. Her name, spoken softly, almost tenderly. She spun around, the flashlight beam jerking wildly. Nothing. The hallway was empty, the cabin silent. Her pulse raced, her mind scrambling for explanations. It was the wind, or her imagination, or exhaustion playing tricks. She hadn't slept in days, not since the fight with Mark, not since she'd found those messages on his phone, the ones that shattered everything. She was just stressed. That was all. She sank back onto the couch, but the unease clung to her like damp air. Her eyes kept darting to the hallway, expecting something. She didn't know what. To distract herself, she grabbed the photograph from the mantel, wiping dust from the glass. The family's faces were too faded to make out, but their eyes seemed to follow her, unblinking. She set it down quickly, her skin prickling. The fire was dying, and the cold was creeping back in. She needed more wood. The stack by the hearth was nearly gone, but she'd seen a shed out back when she arrived. Reluctantly, she pulled on her coat and stepped outside, the storm's wind biting at her face. The shed was a crumbling structure, barely standing, its door hanging by a single hinge. Inside, she found a pile of logs and something else. Carved into the shed's wall was a jagged symbol, a circle with jagged lines radiating from it, like a sun with broken rays. It looked freshly etched, the wood around it pale and splintered. Her stomach lurched. Who would come out here to do that? She grabbed an armful of wood and hurried back to the cabin, locking the door behind her. Back inside, the fire roared back to life, but the warmth did little to ease her nerves. The whisper came again, her name, clearer now, coming from the hallway. She gripped the fireplace poker, her knuckles white. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice cracking. Silence answered, but it felt alive, heavy, like the cabin itself was holding its breath. She inched toward the hallway, the poker raised, her flashlight cutting through the dark. The corridor stretched longer than it should have, the walls narrowing, the air growing colder with each step. At the end was a door she hadn't noticed before, its wood blackened as if scorched. She hesitated, every instinct screaming to turn back. But the whisper came again, her name laced with a strange, coaxing warmth. Against her better judgment, she turned the knob. The door opened to a staircase descending into darkness, the air thick with that same sour decay she'd smelled earlier. Her flashlight barely pierced the gloom, but she could make out damp stone walls, slick with something that glistened like oil. She took a step down, then another, the poker trembling in her hand. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, a chorus of voices now all saying her name. At the bottom of the stairs was a small room, its walls covered in the same jagged sun symbol she'd seen in the shed, carved over and over, some smeared with a dark, sticky substance. In the center of the room was a mirror, its surface clouded but strangely reflective, pulling her gaze. She stepped closer, unable to look away. Her reflection stared back, but it wasn't right. Her eyes were too wide, her mouth twisted into a smile she wasn't making. The reflection moved, raising a hand, though Sarah's arms hung limp at her sides. She stumbled back, the poker clattering to the floor. The whispers surged, filling the room, her name now a demand, not a plea. She ran, scrambling up the stairs, slamming the door behind her. The cabin was no longer silent. The walls groaned, the floor creaked, and the fire had gone out, leaving the room in darkness. She fumbled for her flashlight, her hand shaking so badly she dropped it. When she picked it up, the beam caught the photograph on the mantel. The family's faces were no longer blurred. They were hers, her face repeated, staring back from every figure in the frame. She screamed, backing toward the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was jammed, the wood swollen as if the cabin itself refused to let her go. The whispers were everywhere now, coming from the walls, the floor, her own head. She ran to the window, smashing it with the poker, but the glass didn't break. It flexed, like something alive pushing back against her blows. Panic clawed at her chest. She was trapped. Then she heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat coming from the basement. The door at the end of the hallway creaked open on its own, the darkness beyond pulsing with that same rhythm. She didn't want to go back, but the cabin seemed to shrink around her, the walls closing in, forcing her toward the hallway. She clutched the poker, her only weapon, and moved toward the sound, each step heavier than the last. The basement was different now. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the thumping. The mirror was still there, but her reflection was gone. In its place was Mark, his face pale, his eyes hollow. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice echoing in the room, though his lips didn't move. She screamed his name, but the figure in the mirror only smiled, a slow, cruel twist of his mouth. The thumping grew louder, faster, and the walls began to weep that dark, sticky substance pooling on the floor. She turned to run, but the stairs were gone, replaced by a smooth, unbroken wall. The whispers were deafening now, no longer her name, but words she couldn't understand, sharp and guttural, slicing into her mind. She swung the poker at the mirror, desperate to break it, but the glass absorbed the blow, rippling like water. Hands reached out from the surface, cold, gray, claw-like, grabbing her wrists, pulling her toward the mirror. She fought, kicking and screaming, but the hands were too strong, dragging her closer until her face was inches from the glass. Then, silence. The thumping stopped. The whispers ceased, and the hands released her. She stumbled back, gasping, but the room was empty now, the symbols gone, the mirror blank. She was alone, or so she thought. A soft laugh came from behind her, low and familiar. She turned, and there was Mark, standing in the corner, his eyes gleaming with something not human. "You can't leave," he said, his voice layered with others, a chorus of the damned. "You were never alone." She bolted for where the stairs had been, pounding on the wall, screaming for help. The cabin answered, a deep, shuddering groan, like laughter. The floor gave way beneath her, and she fell, not into darkness but into light, blinding and cold. When her vision cleared, she was back in the living room, sitting on the couch, the fire burning brightly. The photograph was on the mantel, the family's faces blurred again. Her bag was by the door, untouched. The storm raged outside, but the cabin was warm, quiet. She stood, her legs weak, and checked the door. It opened easily. She grabbed her bag and ran into the rain, not caring about the cold or the dark. Her car was where she'd left it, and by some miracle it started. She drove, not looking back, the cabin fading into the trees. Hours later, she reached a gas station, the first sign of civilization. The clerk, an old man with tired eyes, asked if she was okay. She nodded, unable to speak, and bought a coffee, her hands still shaking. When she got back to her car, she noticed something in her bag. The photograph from the cabin, the one with the blurred faces, was tucked inside. She hadn't taken it. Her breath hitched as she stared at it, and for a moment the faces flickered. Hers, Mark's, and others, strangers with her eyes, smiling. She threw it out the window and drove, the road stretching endlessly ahead, but the whispers followed, faint at first, growing louder with every mile. Her name over and over, not from the car or the road, but from inside her. And in the rearview mirror, just for a second, she saw her own reflection smile, a smile she wasn't making. The fog clung to the ground like a living thing, curling around the ankles of the old house at the edge of town. It was a place nobody visited, not since the fire years ago that left it blackened and hollow, a skeleton of charred wood and broken glass. People said it was cursed, that the family who died inside still lingered, their screams baked into the walls. I didn't believe in ghosts. I was 17, too old for campfire stories. But when my friends dared me to spend the night there, my pride wouldn't let me back down. The house loomed ahead, its jagged silhouette cutting into the moonless sky, and my stomach twisted as I stepped onto the sagging porch. The air was wrong. Too still, too heavy, like breathing through a wet cloth. I told myself it was just nerves, but the moment I pushed open the door, a cold draft licked the back of my neck, and I swore I heard a whisper, faint and sharp, like a blade on bone. Inside, the darkness was absolute. My flashlight flickered, its beams struggling against the thick shadows. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and every step kicked up dust that stung my eyes. The smell was worse, rotten wood, mildew, and something sweeter, like spoiled meat. I gripped my backpack tighter, feeling the weight of my sleeping bag and the cheap knife I'd brought for courage. My friends were supposed to meet me here, but the house felt empty, abandoned in a way that went beyond the physical. I called out for them, Jake, Sarah, Mike, but my voice died in the air, swallowed by the silence. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course, I was alone. I moved deeper into the house, the beam of my flashlight catching glimpses of ruined furniture, a shattered mirror, a table with 3 legs, a sofa with springs spilling out like guts. The walls were streaked with soot, and in places, I could still see the claw marks of flames that had devoured everything. I reached the staircase, its steps warped and uneven, leading up into a blackness that seemed to pulse. I didn't want to go up there, but the dare was to spend the night, and I wasn't going to chicken out in the first 10 minutes. I took a deep breath and started climbing. Halfway up, the air grew colder and my flashlight flickered again, plunging me into darkness for a heartbeat. When it came back on, I froze. At the top of the stairs, just beyond the edge of the light, something moved. A shadow, quick and human-shaped, darted out of sight. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Jake!" I called, my voice cracking. "Sarah, this isn't funny." No answer, just the creak of the house settling, or maybe something else. I gripped the knife in my pocket, its handle slick with sweat, and forced myself to keep going. The second floor was worse. The hallway stretched out, lined with doors that hung off their hinges like broken teeth. The air up here was thicker, almost suffocating, and that sweet, rotten smell was stronger. I moved slowly, checking each room. Most were empty, just piles of debris and the occasional piece of furniture too broken to salvage. But in one room I found something that made my blood run cold. A child's doll, its porcelain face cracked, one eye missing, lying in the center of the floor like it had been placed there. Around it, in the dust, were tiny footprints, too small to belong to any of my friends. I backed out of the room, my pulse roaring in my ears, and that's when I heard it. A low, guttural laugh, coming from the end of the hall. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the hallway, the doors, the dust. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but I couldn't. Not yet. I had to prove I wasn't afraid. I moved toward the sound, my knife now in my hand, its blade catching the light. The last door at the end of the hall was closed, the only one that looked intact. I reached for the knob, my hand shaking, and pushed it open. The room was different, cleaner somehow, like time hadn't touched it. A bed sat in the corner, its sheets yellowed but whole. A dresser stood against one wall, its mirror uncracked, reflecting my pale, terrified face. And in the center of the room was a rocking chair, moving slowly back and forth, as if someone had just stood up. I stepped inside, my breath hitching, and the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew colder, the smell of decay so thick I gagged. And then, from behind me, a voice, soft, childlike, but wrong, like it was coming from underwater. "Stay with us." I turned, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and saw her. A girl maybe 10 years old, standing in the corner. Her dress was burned, her skin gray and peeling, her eyes black pits that seemed to suck in the light. She smiled, and her teeth were sharp, too many for a human mouth. I screamed, stumbling back and hit the door. The knife slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. She didn't move, just kept smiling, and the rocking chair began to move again, faster now, creaking like a heartbeat. I pounded on the door, my fists bruising, but it was no use. The room was shrinking, the walls closing in, or maybe it was just my panic making it feel that way. I grabbed the knife and swung it at her, but she was gone, the corner empty. The chair stopped rocking. I don't know how long I stood there panting, my back against the door. The silence was worse than the noise. I forced myself to move, to search for a way out. The window was boarded up, the glass behind it shattered. I tried prying the boards loose, but they were nailed tight, and my fingers bled from the effort. That's when I noticed the mirror. My reflection was wrong. It wasn't moving with me. It stood still, staring, its eyes black like hers. I screamed again, throwing my flashlight at the mirror. It shattered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in the shards, hundreds of eyes watching me. I don't remember how I got out of that room. The door was open when I tried it again, and I ran, tripping down the stairs, not caring about the dare or my friends or anything except getting out. But when I reached the front door, it was locked. I kicked it, pounded it, but it wouldn't give. The house was alive, trapping me, and I could feel it watching, waiting. I ran to the back, through the kitchen, where the air was thick with that sweet rot. The back door was there, but it was boarded up too, and the boards were fresh, as if someone had nailed them up while I was upstairs. That's when I heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from the dining room. I ducked behind the counter, clutching my knife, my breath shallow. The footsteps stopped, and I peeked out. There was a man standing in the doorway, tall and thin, his face hidden in shadow. He wasn't one of my friends. He wasn't anyone I knew. He tilted his head, like he was listening. And then he spoke, his voice low and rough. "You shouldn't have come here." I bolted, running back toward the front of the house, but the layout was wrong now. The rooms didn't connect the way they had before. Hallways looped back on themselves, doors led to walls, and the windows showed nothing but blackness, like the house was floating in a void. I ended up in the basement, though I don't remember finding the stairs. It was damp, the air heavy with mold, and the walls were lined with shelves, each one holding jars filled with dark liquid. I didn't look too closely. I couldn't. There was a door at the far end, metal and rusted, and I ran for it, praying it was a way out. It wasn't locked, but when I opened it, I wished I hadn't. Beyond it was a room, small and bare, with a single chair in the center. And sitting in that chair were my friends, Jake, Sarah, Mike. Their eyes were gone, their mouths open in silent screams, their bodies slumped like puppets with cut strings. I screamed until my throat was raw, backing away, but the door slammed shut, and the man was behind me now, his breath hot on my neck. "You can't leave," he said. "Not yet." I don't know how I survived that night. I remember running, hiding, crawling through vents that shouldn't have existed. I remember the girl's laughter, the man's footsteps, the way the house seemed to shift around me, a living maze that wanted me dead. I remember finding a window unboarded and throwing myself through it, glass cutting my arms as I fell into the fog outside. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing in the field beyond the house. When I looked back, the house was gone, just a patch of empty ground where it had stood. The police didn't believe me. They said the house burned down years ago, that there was nothing left. My friends were missing, their car found abandoned on the road. I was the only one who came back. But I know what I saw, what I felt. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear the girl's voice, feel the man's breath, see the house waiting for me in the fog. I don't sleep much anymore, because deep down, I know the truth. The house isn't gone. It's still out there, waiting for me to come back, and one day, I might not have a choice. The fog clung to the forest like a shroud, muffling sound and swallowing sight. I stumbled through the underbrush, my breath sharp in my chest, the cold air biting at my lungs. I didn't know how long I'd been running or what I was running from, only that the weight of something watching pressed against my back, urging me deeper into the trees. My flashlight flickered, its beam cutting weakly through the mist, illuminating gnarled branches that seemed to twist into shapes that weren't quite right, faces maybe, or hands reaching out. I shook my head, trying to clear the thought. It was just the forest, just the dark, just my imagination. I'd come to the cabin for a weekend alone, a chance to clear my head after months of grinding work and a breakup that still stung. The cabin was my uncle's, a rickety thing tucked so deep in the woods you'd miss it if you didn't know the way. He'd left it to me when he passed, along with a cryptic note. "Stay out of the cellar." I'd laughed it off at the time. Old houses always came with ghost stories, but now, as I crashed through the trees, that warning gnawed at me. I hadn't gone into the cellar. I hadn't even found a door to one. So why was I running? Why did my skin crawl with the certainty that something was wrong? It started that morning. I'd woken to silence, the kind that feels too heavy, like the world is holding its breath. The cabin was cold, the fire I'd set the night before reduced to ash. I'd made coffee, trying to shake the unease, but the feeling grew as the day wore on. Little things at first. A shadow moving in the corner of my eye, gone when I turned. A faint tapping from the walls, like something testing the wood. By afternoon, I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. I checked the locks, the windows, even the attic, but found nothing. Just an old cabin creaking in the wind, I told myself. But then I heard it. A low, guttural sound, not quite a voice coming from somewhere inside the house. I'd grabbed my coat and flashlight and bolted outside, thinking fresh air would clear my head. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The kind of stillness that makes your own heartbeat sound like a drum. I walked a loop around the cabin, checking for signs of animals or intruders, but the ground was undisturbed, the windows intact. That's when I noticed the fog rolling in, thick and sudden, curling around the trees like it had a mind of its own. I should have gone back inside, but something pulled me toward the woods, a sound maybe, or just a feeling. And then I was running, the cabin long out of sight, the fog closing in. Now, my legs burned and my flashlight was dying. I stopped, leaning against a tree, trying to catch my breath. The air was heavy, damp, and carried a faint smell, like wet earth and something sour. I strained to listen, but there was nothing, just the fog and the dark. My hand brushed against the tree and I froze. The bark felt wrong, too smooth, almost soft, like skin. I yanked my hand back, heart pounding, and shone the flashlight on it. Just a tree, gnarled and old. But for a moment, I could have sworn it pulsed under my touch. I forced myself to move, picking a direction and praying it led back to the cabin. The fog seemed to thicken with every step, the trees looming closer, their branches tangling overhead like a cage. I tried to focus on the ground, on placing one foot in front of the other, but my mind kept circling back to the cabin, to that sound I'd heard. It wasn't an animal, not a creak of wood or a gust of wind. It was deliberate, like something trying to speak, or worse, trying not to be heard. After what felt like hours, I saw a shape through the fog, a low, angular silhouette, the cabin. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. The windows were dark, the door slightly ajar, though I was sure I'd locked it. I approached slowly, my flashlight barely cutting through the mist. The air felt heavier here, oppressive, like it was pushing me back. I stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under my weight, and peered inside. The living room was as I'd left it. The couch, the coffee table, the cold fireplace. But something was off. The air smelled wrong, that same sour, earthy stench, stronger now. I stepped inside, my flashlight sweeping the room. Shadows danced on the walls, but nothing moved. I called out, my voice thin and shaky, half expecting an answer. None came. I checked the kitchen, the bedroom, even the bathroom, but the cabin was empty. The tapping started again, faint at first, coming from the floor. I froze, listening. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm, like footsteps pacing below me. My uncle's note flashed in my mind. Stay out of the cellar. But there was no cellar door, no trapdoor, no sign of one pragmatic programmers or anything beneath the cabin. I knelt by the fireplace, running my hands over the floorboards. Solid, no give. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, directly beneath me. I pressed my ear to the floor, my heart racing. The sound was clearer now, not footsteps, but something else. Scratching, like nails on wood. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox under the sink and pried at the boards. They came up easier than I expected, revealing a dark, narrow staircase descending into the ground. The smell hit me hard, that sour, earthy stench, so thick it made my eyes water. I should have left. I should have run to my car and driven away. Ascending the ladder, I descended, my flashlight barely illuminating the steps. The air grew colder, the walls of the staircase dripping with moisture. At the bottom, I found a small empty room, the floor covered in dirt. But in the center was a wooden chair, simple and worn, facing a blank wall. I sat in it, my legs weak, and stared at the wall. Scratched into the wood in jagged, uneven letters were the words, "It's still here." I stood, my blood running cold. The scratching, the sound, the presence I'd felt. It wasn't my imagination. Something was down here. I climbed the stairs, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and ran back to the living room. The fog outside was thicker now, pressing against the windows like a living thing. I locked the door, my hands trembling, and sat on the couch, trying to make sense of it. The words on the chair echoed in my mind. It's still here. What was? My uncle's warning? Something he'd known about. Something he'd tried to keep me from. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat by the fireplace, feeding it logs until the flames roared, but the warmth couldn't touch the chill in my bones. Every creak of the cabin made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. By morning, the fog had lifted, but the feeling lingered. I packed my bag and drove away, the cabin shrinking in my rearview mirror. I told myself it was nothing, just an old house and a tired mind. But as I reached the highway, I glanced in the mirror and saw something move in the back seat. A shadow, a shape, gone when I turned to look. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, and I didn't stop driving until the forest was far behind me. But the story doesn't end there. Weeks later, back in the city, I started noticing things. Shadows in my apartment that didn't belong, a faint tapping in the walls at night. I'd wake to find my keys moved, my phone on the floor, my coffee mug shattered in the sink. I told myself it was nothing, stress, exhaustion, a bad dream. But one night, I woke to that sour, earthy smell, and my flashlight, left on the nightstand, was on the floor, its beam flickering weakly. I moved out the next day, to a new apartment, a new city. The tapping followed me. So did the shadows. I don't go into the woods anymore. I don't trust the dark. And every night, as I lie in bed, I listen for that sound, that scratching, that thing that's still here. The rain came down in sheets, hammering the windshield of my car as I navigated the winding road through the forest. The wipers screamed with every swipe, barely keeping the glass clear. I'd been driving for hours, the GPS long since useless, its signal swallowed by the dense trees and the storm. I was supposed to be at the lake house by now, a rental I'd booked for a quiet weekend to escape the city and the weight of a life that felt like it was unraveling. But the road seemed endless, the forest pressing in closer with every mile, and a creeping sense of wrongness settled in my gut. I didn't know where I was, and the feeling that I wasn't alone in the car prickled at the back of my neck. I'd seen something earlier, just a flicker in the rearview mirror, a shadow that moved too smoothly, too deliberately to be a trick of the light. I'd glanced over my shoulder, heart pounding, but the back seat was empty, just my duffel bag and a crumpled water bottle. I told myself it was exhaustion, the rain, the dark, but the feeling didn't leave. And now, as the road narrowed and the trees loomed like silent sentinels, I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching me, waiting for me to stop. The lake house appeared suddenly, its silhouette emerging from the downpour like a ghost. It was smaller than the pictures online, squat and weathered, with a sagging porch and windows that stared blankly into the night. I parked as close to the door as I could, grabbed my bag, and ran through the rain, fumbling with the key the owner had mailed me. The lock stuck, the door groaning as it finally gave way. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, smelling of mildew and something sharper, like old metal. I flicked on the light switch, but the bulb buzzed and died, leaving me in the dark with only my phone's flashlight to cut through the gloom. The house was sparse: a sagging couch, a wooden table, a fireplace stacked with logs that looked like they'd been there for years. I set my bag down and checked the windows, making sure they were locked. The rain battered the roof, a relentless drone that made the silence inside feel unnatural. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just the storm, just the isolation. I'd come here to clear my head, to forget the fights, the bills, the job that was sucking the life out of me. But as I stood in the dim living room, the shadows seemed to shift, pooling in corners where the light didn't reach. I built a fire, the crackle of the flames a small comfort. My phone had no signal, but I didn't need it tonight. I just needed to sleep, to reset. I sat on the couch, watching the fire, when I heard it. A faint thump from upstairs. My breath caught. The listing said the house was one story, no attic, no second floor. I listened, straining over the rain, and there it was again. Thump, thump, slow and deliberate, like footsteps on wood. I grabbed my flashlight from the bag, its beam stronger than my phone's, and stood, my heart hammering. The ceiling creaked above me, a long, drawn-out groan, as if something heavy had shifted. I should have left then. I should have grabbed my keys and run back to the car. But something held me there. Curiosity, maybe, or the stubborn need to prove I wasn't scared. I moved to the hallway, the flashlight sweeping over peeling wallpaper and a narrow door I hadn't noticed before. It was tucked under the staircase, barely visible in the shadows, with no handle, just a rusted latch. The thumping stopped as I approached, the silence heavier than before. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold metal, and the latch gave way with a soft click. The door swung open, revealing a staircase leading up into darkness. The air that wafted down was cold, carrying a sour, metallic tang that made my stomach turn. I shone the flashlight up the stairs, the beam catching on cobwebs and cracked wood. The listing hadn't mentioned this. I called out, my voice thin and shaky, asking if anyone was there. No answer, just the rain and the creak of the house. I took a step up, then another, the stairs groaning under my weight. The air grew colder with every step, the smell stronger, until I reached a small landing with a single door. It was heavy, made of dark wood, and carved into it were words, faint but legible. Do not open. My hand hovered over the knob. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but I couldn't. I had to know. I twisted the knob, and the door opened with a low moan. Beyond it was a room, small and bare, with a single window boarded shut. In the center stood a mirror, tall and ornate, its glass clouded and cracked. My flashlight's beam reflected oddly, the light bending in ways it shouldn't. I stepped closer, my reflection distorted, my face stretching and twisting in the glass. And then I saw it. Behind my reflection, a shape, tall and thin, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. I spun around, the flashlight sweeping the room, but it was empty. My heart pounded, my breath coming in short gasps. I turned back to the mirror and the shape was gone, but my reflection was wrong. It was me, but not me. My eyes were too wide, my mouth curled in a smile I wasn't making. I backed away, the flashlight shaking in my hand, and tripped over something soft. I looked down and stifled a scream. It was a shoe, a child's shoe, caked in dried mud, lying alone in the dust. I ran, the stairs blurring beneath me as I stumbled back to the living room. The fire was out, the room colder than before. I grabbed my keys, ready to bolt, when I heard it again. Thump, thump, coming from the hallway now. I froze, the flashlight trained on the open door to the stairs. The sound grew closer, heavier, like something dragging itself down the steps. I backed toward the front door, my hand fumbling with the lock, when the thumping stopped. Silence, thick and suffocating, filled the house. Then, from the hallway, a voice, low, rasping, not entirely human, whispered my name. I threw the door open and ran into the rain, the car keys slipping in my wet hands. The storm roared around me, the forest a wall of black beyond the headlights. I started the car, the engine sputtering before it caught, and peeled onto the road. The lake house vanished in the rearview mirror, but that feeling, that presence, followed me. I drove for hours, the rain unrelenting, until I reached a gas station, its neon sign a beacon in the dark. I stumbled inside, soaking wet, and asked the clerk for directions to the highway. He looked at me strangely, his eyes lingering too long. "You came from the lake road?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, and he leaned closer, his breath sour. "Nobody stays at that house. Not after what happened." I asked what he meant, but he just shook his head and handed me a map circling the highway. I didn't press him. I didn't want to know. I drove on, the road stretching endlessly before me, the forest never quite letting go. By the time I reached the city, the rain had stopped, but the weight of that night clung to me. I tried to settle back into my life, but things were different. My apartment felt wrong, the shadows too deep, the silence too loud. At night, I'd hear it, thump, thump, like footsteps pacing just beyond my walls. One night, weeks later, I found the shoe. It was under my bed, the same child's shoe caked in mud, though I hadn't brought it with me. I burned it in the sink, the smoke stinging my eyes, but the smell lingered, that sour metallic tang. I moved, changed cities, changed jobs, but the thumping followed, faint at first, then louder, closer. Sometimes in the dark, I'd catch my reflection in a window or a mirror, and it wasn't right. My eyes too wide, my mouth smiling when I wasn't. I don't sleep much anymore. I keep the lights on, the curtains drawn, but last night I found something new. Scratched into the wood of my bedroom door, so faint I almost missed it, were the words, "Do not open." And as I stood there staring, the thumping started again, not from the walls, but from inside the room, behind me where the mirror hung on the wall. The car's engine sputtered as I pulled off the highway onto a narrow, unmarked road, the tires crunching over gravel, swallowed by shadows. The headlights carved weak tunnels through the dark, illuminating twisted branches that clawed at the sky. I'd been driving too long, chasing a vague promise of solitude in a cabin I'd found online, a last-minute rental to escape the city's suffocating grip. My phone was dead, the GPS useless, and the map I'd scribbled on a napkin was smeared beyond recognition. I was lost, the forest closing in, and a creeping dread settled into my bones, whispering that I wasn't alone. I'd seen something earlier, a flicker in the side mirror, a shape too tall, too still, standing just beyond the road's edge. I'd blinked, and it was gone, but my pulse hadn't slowed since. The radio hissed static, cutting in and out, and every so often I swore I heard a voice beneath the noise, low and guttural, saying my name. I turned it off, the silence worse, but safer. The road stretched on, endless, until a sign loomed up. "Private property, 2 miles." The cabin. Relief spiked through me, sharp and fleeting, because the air felt heavier now, like the forest was holding its breath. The cabin emerged from the dark, a squat, weathered thing with a slanted roof and windows like empty eyes. I parked, the engine ticking as it cooled, and grabbed my bag, stepping into air thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. The key was under the mat, as promised, but the lock stuck, the door groaning like it didn't want to open. Inside, the air was cold, stale, carrying a faint metallic tang that made my nose wrinkle. I fumbled for a light switch, but the bulb flickered once and died, leaving me with my flashlight's thin beam. The living room was sparse, a sagging couch, a rickety table, a fireplace with a pile of logs coated in dust. I locked the door behind me, the click too loud in the quiet. I built a fire, the flames struggling against the damp wood, and sat on the couch, trying to shake the unease. I'd come here to clear my head, to forget the layoffs, the breakup, the endless grind of a life that felt like it was slipping away. But the cabin didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a trap. The walls creaked, the wind rattling the windows, and then I heard it, a soft thump from somewhere deep in the house. I froze, my flashlight sweeping the room, but nothing moved. Another thump, louder from the hallway. My heart pounded as I stood, the beam catching on a narrow door I hadn't noticed, half hidden behind a bookshelf. The door was old, its paint peeling, with no knob, just a rusted latch. The thumping stopped as I approached, the silence thick and oppressive. I reached for the latch, my fingers trembling, and the door creaked open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The air that drifted up was cold, sharp with that metallic smell, now mixed with something sour like decay. I called out, my voice swallowed by the dark, and got no answer. The flashlight's beam barely reached the bottom, showing a dirt floor and walls that glistened with moisture. I should have closed the door, walked away, but something pulled me forward, a need to know, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The stairs groaned under my weight, each step colder than the last. At the bottom, I found a small room, empty except for a single object, a wooden chair facing a blank wall. Scratched into the wood, in jagged, uneven lines, were the words, "It sees you." My breath caught, the words burning into my mind. I backed away, the flashlight shaking, and tripped over something soft. I looked down and stifled a scream. It was a glove, small, like a child's, stained with something dark and crusted. I scrambled up the stairs, slamming the door behind me, and ran to the living room, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. The fire was out, the room colder than before. I grabbed my keys, ready to run, when the thumping started again. Not from the basement, but from above, the ceiling creaking like something heavy was moving across it. The listing said the cabin was one story, no attic, no upper floor. I stood frozen, the flashlight trained on the ceiling, watching dust drift down with each thump. The sound grew closer, deliberate, like footsteps circling above me. I backed toward the front door, my hand on the lock, when the thumping stopped. Silence, heavy and suffocating, pressed in. Then from the hallway, a low, rasping voice whispered my name. I threw the door open and ran to the car, the gravel biting my feet through my shoes. The engine roared to life, and I sped down the road, the cabin vanishing in the rearview mirror. But the mirror showed something else, a shadow in the back seat, tall and thin, its edges blurring into the dark. I screamed, swerving, and glanced back. Nothing, just my bag and the empty seat. I didn't stop driving until I hit a gas station, its flickering neon sign a lifeline. Inside, the clerk, an old man with sunken eyes, barely looked up as I asked for the highway. I mentioned the cabin, and his hand stilled, his gaze locking on mine. "You stayed there?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl. I nodded, and he leaned closer, his breath sour. "Nobody stays there, not after the fire." "What fire?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer, just pointed to a map on the counter and circled the highway. I left, the weight of his words sinking in, but I didn't want to know more. I drove on, the forest thinning, the road widening, until I reached the city. I tried to settle back into my life, but the cabin followed me. At night, I'd hear the thumping, faint at first, then louder, coming from the walls of my apartment. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, gone when I turned. My keys would vanish, reappearing in places I hadn't left them. Once I found my flashlight on the kitchen counter, its beam flickering weakly, though I hadn't touched it since that night. Weeks later, I woke to the metallic smell, sharp and sour, filling my bedroom. I sat up, my heart racing, and saw it. A glove, small and stained, on my nightstand. I hadn't brought it with me. I burned it in the sink, the smoke stinging my eyes, but the smell lingered. I moved to a new apartment, changed my number, told no one where I was going. But the thumping followed, closer now, sometimes so loud it shook the walls. I started sleeping with the lights on, avoiding mirrors, because sometimes in the glass I'd see my reflection smile when I wasn't. One night, I found scratches on my bedroom door, faint but clear. It sees you. I didn't sleep after that. I sat up, listening, waiting until I heard it. A soft thump, not from the walls, but from inside my closet. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, my hands shaking, and approached the door. The thumping grew louder, faster, like a heartbeat. I yanked the door open, the knife raised, and found nothing, just clothes and boxes. But the air was cold, the metallic smell overwhelming, and on the closet floor was another glove, identical to the first. I ran, leaving everything behind, and checked into a motel, paying cash, locking the door. But that night, the thumping came again, from under the bed. I didn't look. I couldn't. I sat on the floor, the knife in my hand, and waited for morning. When the sun rose, I drove to a new city, then another, never staying long. The thumping always found me. The shadows always followed. I don't look in mirrors anymore. I don't open closets. And every night as I lie awake, I feel it, watching, waiting, whispering my name from just beyond the dark. The road was a black ribbon through the forest, barely visible in the dark as my car's headlights flickered, struggling against the night. I'd been driving for hours, the GPS dead, my phone's battery drained, and the handwritten directions on the dashboard reduced to a smudged blur. I was headed to a cabin, a last-minute rental I'd found online to escape the city's chaos. Work, fights, a life unraveling at the seams. But the forest felt alive, its trees leaning in too close, their branches scraping the car like fingers. A chill ran through me, not from the cold, but from the unshakable feeling that something was watching, waiting for me to stop. I'd seen it earlier, just for a second, a shape in the rearview mirror, too tall, too still, standing at the edge of the road. I'd slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, but when I looked back, the road was empty, just shadows and trees. I told myself it was exhaustion, the long drive, the dark playing tricks. But my hands gripped the wheel tighter, and the air in the car felt thick, like I wasn't alone. The radio, silent for miles, crackled suddenly, spitting static and a low, garbled sound that might have been a voice. I switched it off, the silence worse but safer, and kept driving. The cabin appeared without warning, a low, weathered shape crouched among the trees. Its windows were dark, the porch sagging under years of neglect. I parked close, grabbed my bag, and ran through the drizzle to the door, fumbling with the key the owner had mailed me. The lock resisted, the door creaking open only after a hard shove. Inside, the air was damp, heavy with the smell of mildew and something sharper, like rust or blood. I flipped the light switch, but the bulb buzzed and died, leaving me with my flashlight's weak beam. The living room was sparse, a worn couch, a scarred table, a fireplace with logs that looked untouched for decades. I locked the door, the bolts click echoing too loudly. I built a fire, the flames sluggish against the damp wood, and sat on the couch trying to shake the unease. I'd come here to reset, to escape the noise of my life, but the cabin felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. The forest outside was too quiet, the drizzle a faint hiss against the windows. I checked my phone, still no signal, and tried to focus on the fire's crackle. Then I heard it, a soft thud from somewhere inside the house. My breath caught. The sound came again, heavier, from the hallway. I grabbed the flashlight, its beam trembling as I stood, and scanned the room. Nothing moved, but the air felt thicker, pressing against my skin. The hallway was narrow, lined with peeling wallpaper, and at its end was a door I hadn't noticed, half hidden behind a coat rack. It was old, its wood warped, with no handle, just a rusted latch. The thudding stopped as I approached, replaced by a silence that made my ears ring. I reached for the latch, my fingers cold, and the door opened with a low groan, revealing a staircase leading down into darkness. The air that drifted up was frigid, carrying a sour, metallic stench that made my stomach churn. I called out, my voice thin and swallowed by the dark. No answer. The flashlight's beam showed rough stone walls and a dirt floor below, but nothing else. I should have turned back. I should have grabbed my keys and left. But something pulled me forward, a need to know, to prove I wasn't imagining things. I descended the stairs, each step creaking, the air growing colder, the smell stronger. At the bottom was a small room, empty except for a single wooden chair facing a blank wall. Scratched into the wall in jagged, uneven lines were the words, "It knows you're here." My heart stopped. The flashlight shook in my hand, its beam catching on something in the corner. A small, tattered shoe, crusted with dried mud, like it belonged to a child. I backed away, my breath coming in short gasps, and scrambled up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. Back in the living room, the fire was out, the room colder than before. The thudding started again, not from the basement, but from above, the ceiling groaning as if something heavy was moving across it. The listing had said the cabin was 1 story, no attic, no upper floor. I stood frozen, the flashlight trained on the ceiling, watching dust drift down with each thud. The sound grew closer, deliberate, like footsteps pacing above me. I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking, and backed toward the front door. The thudding stopped, and the silence was worse, thick and suffocating. Then, from the hallway, a low, rasping voice whispered my name. I threw the door open and ran to the car, the drizzle soaking through my clothes. The engine sputtered, but caught, and I sped down the road, the cabin vanishing in the rearview mirror. But the mirror showed something else, a shadow in the back seat, tall and thin, its edges smudging into the dark. I swerved, screaming, and glanced back. Nothing, just my bag and an empty seat. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station, its flickering sign cutting through the night. Inside, the clerk, an old woman with eyes like chipped glass, barely looked up as I asked for the highway. I mentioned the cabin and her hands froze, her gaze locking on mine. "You stayed there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, and she leaned closer, her breath sour. "Nobody stays there, not since the family disappeared." "What family?" I asked, my voice breaking. She didn't answer, just handed me a map and pointed to the highway. I left, her words echoing in my head, but I didn't want to know more. I drove on, the forest thinning, the road widening, until I reached the city. I tried to settle back into my life, but the cabin clung to me. At night, I'd hear the thudding, faint at first, then louder, coming from the walls of my apartment. Shadows moved in my peripheral vision, gone when I turned. My keys would disappear, reappearing in strange places, under the couch, in the fridge. Once I found my flashlight on the kitchen counter, its beam flickering, though I hadn't touched it since that night. Weeks later, I woke to that sour metallic smell, thick in my bedroom. I sat up, heart racing, and saw it. A small tattered shoe on my nightstand, identical to the one in the basement. I hadn't brought it with me. I burned it in the sink, Ricciardo, the smoke choking the air, but the smell lingered in my apartment. I moved to a new place, changed my locks, told no one where I was. But the thudding followed, closer now, sometimes so loud it rattled the windows. I stopped sleeping, kept the lights on, avoided dark corners. My reflection in mirrors looked wrong, my eyes too wide, my mouth twitching into a smile I didn't make. One night, I found scratches on my bedroom wall, faint but clear. "It knows you're here." I didn't sleep after that. I sat up, clutching a knife, listening to the thudding which now came from inside my closet. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I moved again to a new city, a new apartment, but the shoe appeared again on my kitchen table, mud flaking onto the wood. I burned it, but the smell stayed, and the thudding grew louder, faster, like a heartbeat. Last night, I woke to find the words scratched into my headboard, inches from where I'd slept. The thudding was inside the room now, under the bed, and in the mirror across from me, my reflection stood still, watching while I screamed. The road twisted through the forest like a vein, dark and endless, my headlights barely piercing the night. The engine hummed, but the silence outside was heavier, broken only by the occasional snap of a branch or the rustle of leaves. I'd been driving too long, chasing a cabin I'd rented online for a weekend escape from a life that felt like it was crumbling. Work piling up, relationships fraying, a constant ache I couldn't name. My phone was dead, the GPS useless, and the scribbled directions on a scrap of paper were smudged into illegibility. I was lost, the trees pressing closer, and a cold dread curled in my chest, whispering that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone. I'd seen it earlier, a flicker in the rearview mirror, a shape too tall, too still, standing just off the road, its edges blurred like smoke. I'd slammed on the brakes, heart hammering, but when I looked back, the road was empty, just shadows and trees. I told myself it was fatigue, the dark, the isolation playing tricks. But my hands shook on the wheel, and the air in the car felt thick, like it was carrying a presence. The radio crackled, spitting static and a low, guttural sound that might have been words. I switched it off, the silence worse but safer, and kept driving, praying the cabin was close. It appeared suddenly, a squat, weathered shape crouched among the trees, its windows dark and lifeless. I parked, the gravel crunching under the tires, and grabbed my bag, sprinting through the cold drizzle to the porch. The key, left under a loose board as promised, stuck in the lock, the door groaning open only after a hard shove. Inside, the air was damp, heavy with the smell of mildew and something sharper, like rust or blood. I flicked the light switch, but the bulb buzzed and died, leaving me with my flashlight's thin beam. The living room was bare, a sagging couch, a scarred table, a fireplace stacked with logs coated in dust. I locked the door, the bolts clicked too loud, and checked the windows, their glass fogged and streaked. I built a fire, the flames struggling against the damp wood, and sat on the couch, trying to shake the unease. I'd come here to clear my head, to find some peace, but the cabin felt wrong, like it was watching me. The forest outside was too quiet, the drizzle a faint hiss against the roof. I checked my phone, no signal, no surprise, and tried to focus on the fire's crackle. Then I heard it, a soft thump from somewhere inside the house. My breath caught. The sound came again, heavier, from the hallway. I grabbed the flashlight, its beam trembling as I stood, and swept it over the room. Nothing moved, but the air felt heavier, pressing against my skin. The hallway was narrow, its wallpaper peeling, and at its end was a door I hadn't noticed, half hidden behind a coat rack. It was old, its wood warped, with no handle, just a rusted latch. The thudding stopped as I approached, replaced by a silence that made my ears ache. I reached for the latch, my fingers cold, and the door creaked open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The air that drifted up was frigid, carrying a sour, metallic stench that made my stomach turn. I called out, my voice swallowed by the dark, and got no answer. The flashlight's beam showed rough stone walls and a dirt floor below, but nothing else. I should have turned back. I should have grabbed my keys and run. But something pulled me forward, a need to know, to prove I wasn't losing it. I descended the stairs, each step creaking, the air growing colder, the smell stronger. At the bottom was a small room, empty except for a single wooden chair facing a blank wall. Scratched into the wall, in jagged, uneven lines, were the words, "It's already here." My heart stopped. The flashlight shook in my hand, its beam catching on something in the corner, a small, tattered glove, crusted with dried mud, like it belonged to a child. I backed away, my breath ragged, and scrambled up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. In the living room, the fire was out, the room colder than before. The thudding started again, not from the basement but from above, the ceiling groaning as if something heavy was moving across it. The listing had said the cabin was one story, no attic, no upper floor. I stood frozen, the flashlight trained on the ceiling, watching dust drift down with each thud. The sound grew closer, deliberate, like footsteps circling above me. I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking, and backed toward the front door. The thudding stopped, and the silence was worse, thick and suffocating. Then, from the hallway, a low, rasping voice whispered my name. I threw the door open and ran to the car, the drizzle soaking through my clothes. The engine sputtered but caught, and I sped down the road, the cabin vanishing in the rearview mirror. But the mirror showed something else, a shadow in the back seat, tall and thin, its edges smudging into the dark. I swerved, screaming, and glanced back. Nothing, just my bag and an empty seat. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station, its flickering neon sign cutting through the night. Inside, the clerk, an old man with eyes like chipped glass, barely looked up as I asked for the highway. I mentioned the cabin, and his hands froze, his gaze locking on mine. "You stayed there?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl. I nodded and he leaned closer, his breath sour. "Nobody stays there. Not since the family vanished." "What family?" I asked, my voice breaking. He didn't answer, just handed me a map and pointed to the highway. I left, his words echoing in my head, but I didn't want to know more. I drove on, the forest thinning, the road widening, until I reached the city. I tried to settle back into my life, but the cabin clung to me. At night, I'd hear the thudding, faint at first, then louder, coming from the walls of my apartment. Shadows moved in my peripheral vision, gone when I turned. My keys would disappear, reappearing in strange places, under the bed, in the sink. Once, I found my flashlight on the kitchen counter, its beam flickering, though I hadn't touched it since that night. Weeks later, I woke to that sour, metallic smell, thick in my bedroom. I sat up, heart racing, and saw it. A small, tattered glove on my nightstand, identical to the one in the basement. I hadn't brought it with me. I burned it in the sink, the smoke choking the air, but the smell lingered. I moved to a new apartment, changed my locks, told no one where I was. But the thudding followed, closer now. Sometimes so loud it rattled the windows. I stopped sleeping, kept the lights on, avoided dark corners. My reflection in mirrors looked wrong, my eyes too wide, my mouth twitching into a smile I didn't make. One night, I found scratches on my bedroom wall, faint but clear. It's already here. I didn't sleep after that. I sat up, clutching a knife, listening to the thudding, which now came from inside my closet. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I moved again, to a new city, a new apartment, but the glove appeared again on my kitchen table, mud flaking onto the wood. I burned it, but the smell stayed, and the thudding grew louder, faster, like a heartbeat. Last night, I woke to find the words scratched into my headboard, inches from where I'd slept. The thudding was inside the room now, under the bed, and in the mirror across from me, my reflection stood still, watching, while I screamed. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it followed me, but it's here, in every shadow, every sound, every reflection. I don't sleep anymore. I don't look in mirrors, and every night as I sit in the dark, knife in hand, I hear it, thudding, whispering, closer than ever, waiting for me to let it in. The road stretched endlessly through the forest, a narrow scar of asphalt swallowed by shadows. My headlights flickered, barely cutting through the dark, as the car rattled over uneven pavement. I'd been driving too long, chasing a cabin I'd rented online for a weekend escape from a life that felt like it was unraveling. Work piling up, relationships fraying, a gnawing emptiness I couldn't shake. My phone was dead, the GPS useless, and the directions scribbled on a napkin were a smeared mess. The trees loomed closer, their branches scraping the car like claws, and a cold dread settled in my chest, whispering that I wasn't alone. I'd seen something earlier, a flicker in the rearview mirror, a shape too tall, too thin, standing just off the road, its edges blurred like smoke. I'd slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, but when I looked back, the road was empty, just shadows and trees. I told myself it was exhaustion, the long drive, the dark playing tricks, but my hands trembled on the wheel, and the air in the car felt heavy, like it carried a presence. The radio crackled, spitting static and a low, guttural sound that might have been a voice. I switched it off, the silence worse but safer, and kept driving, praying the cabin was near. It appeared without warning, a squat, weathered shape hunched among the trees, its windows dark and lifeless. I parked close, the gravel crunching under the tires, and grabbed my bag, sprinting through the cold drizzle to the porch. The key, left under a loose board as promised, stuck in the lock, the door groaning open only after a hard shove. Inside, the air was damp, heavy with the smell of mildew and something sharper, like rust or blood. I flicked the light switch, but the bulb buzzed and died, leaving me with my flashlight's thin beam. The living room was sparse, a sagging couch, a scarred table, a fireplace stacked with logs coated in dust. I locked the door, the bolts click echoing too loudly, and checked the windows, their glass fogged and streaked. I built a fire, the flames struggling against the damp wood, and sat on the couch, trying to shake the unease. I'd come here to clear my head, to find some peace, but the cabin felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. The forest outside was too quiet, the drizzle a faint hiss against the roof. I checked my phone, no signal, no surprise, and tried to focus on the fire's crackle. Then I heard it, a soft thump from somewhere inside the house. My breath caught. The sound came again, heavier, from the hallway. I grabbed the flashlight, its beam trembling as I stood, and swept it over the room. Nothing moved, but the air felt thicker, pressing against my skin. The hallway was narrow, its wallpaper peeling, and at its end was a door I hadn't noticed, half hidden behind a coat rack. It was old, its wood warped, with no handle, just a rusted latch. The thudding stopped as I approached, replaced by a silence that made my ears ring. I reached for the latch, my fingers cold, and the door creaked open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The air that drifted up was frigid, carrying a sour, metallic stench that made my stomach churn. I called out, my voice swallowed by the dark, and got no answer. The flashlight's beam showed rough stone walls and a dirt floor below, but nothing else. I should have turned back. I should have grabbed my keys and run. But something pulled me forward, a need to know, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. I descended the stairs, each step creaking, the air growing colder, the smell stronger. At the bottom was a small room, empty except for a single wooden chair facing a blank wall. Scratched into the wall, in jagged, uneven lines, were the words, "It's already here." My heart stopped. The flashlight shook in my hand, its beam catching on something in the corner, a small, tattered glove, crusted with dried mud, like it belonged to a child. I backed away, my breath ragged, and scrambled up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. In the living room, the fire was out, the room colder than before. The thudding started again, not from the basement but from above, the ceiling groaning as if something heavy was moving across it. The listing had said the cabin was one story, no attic, no upper floor. I stood frozen, the flashlight trained on the ceiling, watching dust drift down with each thud. The sound grew closer, deliberate, like footsteps circling above me. I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking, and backed toward the front door. The thudding stopped, and the silence was worse, thick and suffocating. Then, from the hallway, a low, rasping voice whispered my name. I threw the door open and ran to the car, the drizzle soaking through my clothes. The engine sputtered but caught, and I sped down the road, the cabin vanishing in the rearview mirror. But the mirror showed something else, a shadow in the back seat, tall and thin, its edges smudging into the dark. I swerved, screaming, and glanced back. Nothing. Just my bag and an empty seat. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station, its flickering neon sign cutting through the night. Inside, the clerk, an old man with eyes like chipped glass, barely looked up as I asked for the highway. I mentioned the cabin, and his hands froze, his gaze locking on mine. "You stayed there?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl. I nodded and he leaned closer, his breath sour. "Nobody stays there. Not since the family vanished." "What family?" I asked, my voice breaking. He didn't answer, just handed me a map and pointed to the highway. I left, his words echoing in my head, but I didn't want to know more. I drove on, the forest thinning, the road widening, until I reached the city. I tried to settle back into my life, but the cabin clung to me. At night, I'd hear the thudding, faint at first, then louder, coming from the walls of my apartment. Shadows moved in my peripheral vision, gone when I turned. My keys would disappear, reappearing in strange places, under the bed, in the sink. Once, I found my flashlight on the kitchen counter, its beam flickering, though I hadn't touched it since that night. Weeks later, I woke to that sour metallic smell, thick in my bedroom. I sat up, heart racing, and saw it. A small, tattered glove on my nightstand, identical to the one in the basement. I hadn't brought it with me. I burned it in the sink, the smoke choking the air, but the smell lingered. I moved to a new apartment, changed my locks, told no one where I was. But the thudding followed, closer now. sometimes so loud it rattled the windows. I stopped sleeping, kept the lights on, avoided dark corners. My reflection in mirrors looked wrong, my eyes too wide, my mouth twitching into a smile I didn't make. One night, I found scratches on my bedroom wall, faint but clear. It's already here. I didn't sleep after that. I sat up, clutching a knife, listening to the thudding, which now came from inside my closet. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I moved again, to a new city, a new apartment, but the glove appeared again on my kitchen table, mud flaking onto the wood. I burned it, but the smell stayed, and the thudding grew louder, faster, like a heartbeat. Last night, I woke to find the words scratched into my headboard, inches from where I'd slept. The thudding was inside the room now, under the bed, and in the mirror across from me, my reflection stood still, watching, while I screamed. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it followed me, but it's here, in every shadow, every sound, every reflection. I don't sleep anymore. I don't look in mirrors, and every night as I sit in the dark, knife in hand, I hear it, thudding, whispering closer than ever, waiting for me to let it in. The twist came last night when I realized the glove wasn't a child's. It was mine from years ago, lost long before the cabin. And the voice whispering my name? It's mine too, but not from my throat. It's in the walls, the mirror, the dark, and it's getting louder. The wind howled through the narrow valley, carrying the scent of pine and something sharp, like rust or decay. Laura's boots crunched against the gravel path, her breath fogging in the frigid air. She'd been walking for hours, her legs heavy, her flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. The trail was supposed to lead to a ranger station, a safe haven after her car broke down on the remote mountain road. But the markers had vanished, swallowed by the dense forest, and her phone was a useless brick in her pocket, its screen black. She was alone, miles from help, with only the faint hope of finding shelter before the cold claimed her. A twig snapped behind her, sharp and deliberate. She froze, her heart lurching, the flashlight trembling in her grip. She swung the beam, catching nothing but twisted branches and shadows that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. She told herself it was the wind, an animal, anything but what her instincts screamed. But the sound came again, closer, rhythmic, like footsteps stalking her through the trees. She quickened her pace, her breath ragged, the beam bouncing wildly as she scanned the darkness. Something moved in her peripheral vision, a tall, thin shape darting between the pines, too fast to be sure. Her stomach twisted, but she didn't stop. The path dipped, leading her deeper into the valley, the air growing colder, heavier, the rust-like smell stronger. Her flashlight flickered, the light dimming for a moment before stabilizing. She shook it, cursing, her hands numb from the cold. Ahead, the trees parted, revealing a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. In the center stood a house, its wooden frame sagging, its windows dark except for a single flickering glow. It wasn't the ranger station, but it was shelter, and Laura's body was screaming for rest. She hesitated, her instincts clawing at her to keep moving, to avoid the house's eerie pull. But the wind bit at her exposed skin, and the footsteps, real or imagined, were still behind her. She approached the house, her flashlight beam catching the chipped paint and broken shutters. The front door was ajar, creaking softly in the wind. She pushed it open, the hinges groaning, and stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and that same rust-like smell, now so strong it made her gag. The flickering glow came from a lantern on a table, its flame casting long shadows across the room. The walls were bare, the floor littered with debris, broken glass, scraps of paper, a single shoe lying in the corner. A staircase led to a second floor, its steps warped and uneven. Laura called out, her voice trembling, asking if anyone was there. The house answered with silence, heavy and oppressive, like it was holding its breath. She set her backpack down, her hands shaking as she rummaged for her water bottle. The lantern's light flickered, and she noticed a piece of paper tucked beneath it, yellowed and curling. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the scrawled words. "Don't open the door." Her heart skipped a beat. She glanced at the front door, still ajar, and pushed it shut, the lock clicking into place. The warning made no sense. She was already inside, but it burrowed into her mind, cold and sharp. She backed away from the door, her flashlight beam darting around the room, searching for anything out of place. The shadows seemed to move, curling at the edges of her vision, but when she looked, they were still. A creak came from the staircase, slow and deliberate, like someone was descending. Laura froze, her flashlight aimed at the steps. Nothing was there, but the creaking continued, each sound louder, closer. She backed toward the wall, her heart pounding, the flashlight trembling in her grip. The creaking stopped, and the silence was worse, thick with anticipation. She didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. Then, a low whisper came from the staircase, so faint she wasn't sure she'd heard it. "You shouldn't be here." She bolted for the front door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was stuck, the door sealed as if welded shut. Panic surged through her, and she spun around, her flashlight sweeping the room. The lantern was still burning, but the shadows were darker now, deeper, pooling in the corners like liquid. The whisper came again, closer from the staircase. "Don't open it." She didn't know what it meant. The door was already locked, but the voice was real, low and guttural, not human. She grabbed a chair, wedging it under the door handle, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. The staircase creaked again, and she swung her flashlight toward it. A figure stood at the top, tall and thin, its limbs unnaturally long, its face obscured in shadow. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stared, its presence filling the room with a crushing weight. Laura's breath caught, her body frozen, her mind screaming at her to run. But there was nowhere to go. The figure descended, its movements jerky like a marionette with tangled strings. She backed away, her flashlight beam shaking as it followed the figure's path. It stopped at the bottom of the stairs, its head tilting at an impossible angle, and she saw its face, or lack of one. Where features should have been was a smooth, pale expanse, except for a wide, toothless grin that stretched too far across its skull. She screamed, stumbling backward, tripping over her backpack. The figure didn't move, but the air grew colder, the rust-like smell overwhelming, choking her. She scrambled to her feet, her flashlight falling, its beam spinning across the floor. The figure was gone, but the door rattled, as if something was trying to get in or out. She grabbed the flashlight, her hands trembling, and ran for the staircase, the only way left to go. The steps groaned under her weight, the air growing colder with each one. At the top was a hallway lined with closed doors, their handles rusted and warped. She didn't want to open them, didn't want to know what was behind. But the rattling downstairs was louder now, the door shaking violently. She chose a door at random, her hand hovering over the handle. The note's warning echoed in her mind. "Don't open the door." But the figure was behind her, its presence a cold weight on her back. She turned the handle, the door creaking open to reveal a small room, empty except for a mirror leaning against the wall. Its frame was ornate, carved with twisting shapes that seemed to writhe in the flashlight's beam. Her reflection stared back, pale and terrified, but something was wrong. Her eyes were too wide, her mouth twisted in a way that wasn't hers. She stepped closer, unable to look away, and saw it. A shadow behind her reflection, tall and thin, its grin gleaming in the glass. She spun around, but the room was empty. The mirror rattled, the glass vibrating as if something was pressing against it from the other side. She backed away, her flashlight beam trembling, and the figure stepped out of the mirror, its long limbs unfolding, its grin widening. She screamed, swinging her flashlight, but it passed through the figure like smoke. The room shook, the walls closing in, and she felt herself falling, the floor giving way beneath her. She hit the ground hard, her flashlight skittering across the floor. She was back in the clearing, the house gone, the forest silent under the pale moon. Her backpack lay beside her, the note peeking out of the pocket. She hadn't taken it, hadn't even touched it since the table. Her hand shook as she grabbed it, tearing it to pieces, the paper scattering in the wind. She stood, her legs trembling, and ran, the forest blurring around her. The trail reappeared, leading her to a road, and in the distance she saw lights. A gas station, its neon sign buzzing faintly. She stumbled inside, the bell jingling, and collapsed against the counter. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, looked up, startled. Laura poured out her story, the house, the figure, the mirror, the note. The clerk listened, her face pale, her hands fidgeting with a pen. "You said a house. In the valley?" The clerk asked, her voice low. Laura nodded, her breath still ragged. "It was there, I swear. The light, the mirror, everything." The clerk shook her head. "No house out there. Not for years. They tore it down after the disappearances. People went in, never came out. They said it was haunted, cursed, something." Laura's heart pounded. "What about the mirror?" The clerk's eyes widened. "Mirror? Never heard that part. But you're lucky to be here. Most don't make it out." Laura left, her body trembling, the clerk's words echoing in her mind. She drove away, the road stretching endlessly before her, the forest a dark smear in her rearview mirror. She didn't look back, didn't dare. But as she drove, her eyes flicked to the mirror, and for a moment, she saw it. The figure's grin, its hollow eyes staring back. She screamed, swerving, the car screeching to a stop. The mirror was empty now, reflecting only her terrified face. She tore her gaze away, her hands shaking on the wheel, and kept driving, the road endless, the forest watching. Somewhere, deep in the valley, a lantern flickered, its light warm and inviting, waiting for the next soul to wander too close. The forest was a black void around the car as Emily's headlights flickered, then died, leaving her stranded on a narrow dirt road. Rain lashed the windshield, blurring the world outside into a smear of shadows. She'd been driving for hours, escaping the city after a fight with her sister, the kind that left wounds deeper than words. The car's engine had sputtered without warning, and now, with her phone dead and no signal for miles, she was alone. Through the downpour, she spotted a faint outline, a house, old and sagging, tucked among the trees. It looked abandoned, but it was her only option. Grabbing her backpack, she ran through the rain, mud sucking at her boots, until she reached the porch. The door creaked open under her touch, unlocked, as if waiting. Inside, the air was heavy with mildew and something sharper, like rusted metal. Her flashlight beam cut through the dark, revealing a cluttered living room, a moth-eaten rug, a cracked coffee table, and a fireplace choked with ash. A single chair faced the hearth, its upholstery stained and torn. Emily shivered, her wet clothes clinging to her skin. She needed warmth, shelter, just until the storm passed. She found a pile of logs by the fireplace and set to work, her hands unsteady as she struck a match. The flames caught, casting jittery shadows that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. As the fire grew, a faint thud echoed from upstairs, sharp and deliberate, like a door slamming shut. Emily froze, her breath hitching. The house was old, floors creaked, pipes groaned. It was nothing. But her pulse quickened and she gripped the flashlight tighter. "Hello?" she called, her voice swallowed by the silence. No answer, just the patter of rain against the windows. She shook her head, trying to laugh off the unease. She was tired, stressed, imagining things. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the air thick with an unseen presence. She explored the room, hoping to distract herself. On the coffee table sat a small wooden box, its lid carved with a spiral pattern that seemed to twist under her gaze. She opened it, revealing a bundle of old photographs tied with twine. The top image showed a family, 2 parents, a young girl, standing in front of this house, their faces pale, their smiles stiff. Something about the girl's eyes made Emily's stomach twist. They were too large, too knowing. She set the box down, her fingers tingling, and turned back to the fire. Another thud came from upstairs, louder this time, followed by a faint scrape, like something dragging across the floor. Emily's heart pounded. She grabbed a rusty poker from the fireplace and crept toward the staircase, her flashlight beam trembling. The stairs were narrow, the wood warped and groaning under her weight. At the top, a hallway stretched into darkness, lined with closed doors. The air was colder here, sharp with that metallic tang. She moved slowly, her breath shallow, checking each door. All were locked except one. It opened to a small bedroom, empty except for a cracked mirror on the wall and a child's rocking chair in the corner, swaying slightly as if caught in a breeze. But the window was shut, the room still. She backed out, her skin crawling, and the door slammed shut behind her. She yelped, spinning around, but the hallway was empty. The flashlight flickered, its beam weakening. She smacked it against her palm, and it steadied. But now she heard something else, a whisper, low and indistinct, coming from below. It wasn't her name, not yet, but it felt personal, like a voice that knew her. She hurried downstairs, the poker raised, and found the living room unchanged, the fire still burning. But the wooden box was open again, the photographs scattered across the table. She hadn't touched them. Her hands shook as she gathered the pictures, trying to shove them back into the box. One caught her eye, a photo of the same family, but now there was a fourth figure standing slightly apart. It was her, or someone who looked exactly like her, down to the scar on her chin from a childhood fall. Her breath caught, her mind racing. It was impossible. She'd never been here, never seen this house. She dropped the photo, and the whisper came again, clearer now, her name woven into a soft, coaxing hum. It seemed to come from the walls, the floor, everywhere. She needed to leave. She ran to the front door, but the knob wouldn't turn, the wood swollen and unyielding. The windows were the same, the glass refusing to break when she struck it with the poker. The house felt alive, its walls pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat. The whisper grew louder, her name now a chorus, overlapping, insistent. She backed away from the door, her eyes darting to the staircase. The sound was coming from upstairs again, but now it was accompanied by a slow, deliberate creak, like footsteps descending. She hid behind the chair, clutching the poker, her breath ragged. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs, and the air grew heavy, oppressive. A shadow moved across the room, tall and formless, gliding without sound. It paused by the table, and the photographs rustled, as if being flipped through. Emily's heart thundered, her body frozen. The shadow drifted closer, and she caught a glimpse of it in the firelight. Not a person, but something else. Its edges blurred, its form shifting like smoke. It whispered her name again, and this time, it was her sister's voice. Emily stifled a sob. Her sister was hundreds of miles away, safe in the city. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. The shadow moved past her toward the fireplace, and the flames flared, casting a red glow that illuminated the room. The photographs on the table were different now. Each one showed Emily, alone, standing in front of the house, her expression blank, her eyes too large, like the girls in the first photo. The shadow laughed, a low, guttural sound that vibrated in her bones. She bolted for the stairs, the only way out of the room, and ran back to the bedroom with the mirror. The rocking chair was still now, but the mirror was different. Its surface rippled like water, and her reflection stared back, smiling in a way she wasn't. The reflection raised a hand, beckoning, and Emily felt a pull, like gravity, urging her closer. She fought it, planting her feet. But the whisper, her sister's voice, came again, pleading now. "Help me, Emily. I'm here." Tears streamed down her face. She didn't want to look, didn't want to move, but her body betrayed her, stepping toward the mirror. Her reflection's smile widened, its eyes darkening until they were black voids. The glass rippled again, and hands reached out, pale, bony, not hers, grabbing her wrists. She screamed, pulling back, but the hands were strong, their grip icy. The mirror's surface stretched, and her reflection stepped out, solid, real, standing in the room with her. It was her, but wrong. Her face, her scar. But its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. "You shouldn't have come," it said, its voice a distorted echo of her own. Emily swung the poker, but it passed through the figure like air, clanging against the mirror. The reflection laughed, and the room shook, the walls cracking, the floor tilting. She ran, stumbling down the hallway, the whispers now a deafening roar. The stairs were there, but they led down into darkness, deeper than the house should allow. She had no choice. She descended, the air growing colder, thicker, the metallic smell overwhelming. At the bottom was a basement, its walls slick with something dark and wet. The spiral pattern from the box was carved everywhere, glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. In the center stood a figure, not her reflection, but her sister, pale and trembling, her eyes wide with fear. "Emily, help me," she whispered, her voice real this time, not a trick. Emily ran to her, but as she reached out, her sister's form flickered like a bad signal and vanished. The whispers laughed, and the walls closed in, the carvings glowing brighter, the air so heavy it crushed her chest. She turned to run, but the stairs were gone, replaced by a smooth wall. The reflection appeared again, standing where her sister had been, its smile wider, its eyes blacker. "You're part of it now," it said, and the carvings began to move, spiraling inward, pulling her toward the center of the room. She fought, clawing at the walls, but they were soft, yielding, like flesh. The reflection grabbed her, its touch burning, and she felt herself unraveling, her thoughts fragmenting, her body no longer her own. Then, silence. The basement was gone. She was back in the living room, sitting in the chair by the fire, the photographs neatly stacked in the box. The front door was open, the rain still falling outside. Her backpack sat by the door, untouched. She stood, her legs weak, and walked outside, the car starting without issue. She drove, the house fading into the trees, her mind numb. At a gas station she stopped, her hands shaking as she sipped burnt coffee. She was safe. It was over. But in her backpack, she found a photograph she hadn't taken. One of her, standing in front of the house, her eyes too large, her smile not her own. And in the rearview mirror as she drove away, she saw the reflection again, sitting in the back seat, whispering her name. The rain battered the windshield, each drop exploding like a tiny bomb against the glass, blurring the world beyond into a smear of gray and shadow. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, as the car hydroplaned for a heart-stopping moment on the slick country road. The wipers thrashed, useless against the deluge, and the headlights barely pierced the darkness. My phone had lost signal miles back, the GPS a blank screen mocking my decision to take this shortcut. I was alone, or so I thought, with nothing but the roar of the storm and the faint hum of the radio flickering with static. The shortcut had seemed like a good idea hours ago, a way to shave time off my drive to the cabin where my friends were waiting. The road, barely a line on the map, wound through dense forest, the kind of place where trees seemed to lean in, their branches clawing at the sky. I hadn't seen another car for miles, not a single light or sign of life. Just the endless ribbon of asphalt, slick and treacherous, and the oppressive weight of the storm. My heart thudded, not just from the drive, but from a creeping unease I couldn't shake. It was the kind of feeling you get when you're sure someone's watching, even though you're alone. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow darting across the road, too fast to be human, too large to be an animal. I slammed on the brakes, the car fishtailing as my pulse spiked. The headlights caught nothing but rain and the gnarled trunks of trees. I sat there, engine idling, breath shallow, scanning the darkness. Nothing, just my imagination, I told myself, though my hands trembled as I eased back onto the gas. The radio crackled, a burst of static so loud it made me flinch. And for a moment, I thought I heard a voice, a low guttural whisper beneath the noise. I turned the dial off, plunging the car into silence save for the storm's relentless drumming. Minutes later, the headlights caught something new, a shape by the roadside, hunched and still. A person, maybe, standing just beyond the reach of the light. I slowed, squinting through the rain. It was a woman, her back to me, her long hair plastered to her shoulders by the downpour. She wore a thin dress, soaked through, and stood barefoot on the gravel shoulder. My stomach twisted. No one in their right mind would be out here, not in this storm, not in the middle of nowhere. I hesitated, my instincts screaming to keep driving, but guilt gnawed at me. What if she was hurt, stranded? I pulled over, keeping the engine running, and cracked the window just enough to call out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the rain. She didn't move, didn't turn. The wind howled, and for a moment I thought I heard that whisper again. Not from the radio, but from outside, carried on the storm. I shouted again, louder, but she remained still, her silhouette unnervingly rigid. Against my better judgment, I opened the door, the cold rain stinging my face as I stepped out. "Hey, can you hear me?" She turned then, slowly, her movements jerky, like a puppet on frayed strings. Her face was wrong, too pale, too gaunt, her eyes sunken pits that seemed to swallow the light. My breath caught and I stumbled back toward the car, my hand fumbling for the handle. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared, and then her lips parted in a smile that stretched too wide, revealing teeth that gleamed unnaturally in the headlights. I scrambled into the driver's seat, slamming the door and locking it, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. When I looked back, she was gone. No trace, no shadow, just the empty road and the rain. I floored the gas, the tires spinning before catching traction. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. A trick of the light, exhaustion, the storm messing with my head. Anything but the truth my gut was screaming. I didn't stop, didn't slow. Not until the cabin's lights flickered into view through the trees. Relief flooded me as I pulled into the gravel driveway, the familiar shape of the cabin a lifeline in the dark. My friends' cars were parked outside, and warm light spilled from the windows. I was safe. I had to be. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and coffee, the fire crackling in the hearth. My friends, Jake, Sarah, and Emily, were sprawled on the couch laughing over a card game. They looked up as I stumbled in, drenched and shaking. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Jake said, grinning, but his smile faltered when he saw my face. I told them everything. The shadow on the road, the woman, her impossible smile. Sarah frowned, exchanging a glance with Emily. "You're probably just tired," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Jake, ever the skeptic, laughed it off. "Sounds like you met the local boogeyman. This place is old. People love making up stories." Emily, though, was quiet, her eyes fixed on the fire. "There's a legend," she said finally, her voice low, "about a woman who died out on that road decades ago. They say she was running from something, or someone, when her car crashed. People see her sometimes, standing in the rain. They say she's looking for her killer." The room fell silent, the crackle of the fire suddenly too loud. Jake rolled his eyes, but I saw the way his hands tightened around his beer. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cabin's walls creaked, the wind rattling the windows like fingers tapping to be let in. Every sound made me jump, my mind replaying that woman's face, her smile, the way she'd vanished. I told myself it was just a story, a trick of the mind, but the unease wouldn't let go. Around midnight, I heard it, a faint scratching at the front door, deliberate and slow. My heart stopped. I lay frozen, straining to listen, hoping it was just a branch in the wind. But then it came again, sharper, like nails dragging across wood. I crept to the living room where the others were asleep, their breathing soft and even. The scratching stopped, replaced by a low, guttural hum, like a voice trying to form words but failing. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it, and peered through the window. Nothing but darkness and rain. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the storm, but when I turned back, I froze. The front door was slightly ajar, a sliver of black beyond it, as if someone had opened it and slipped inside. I woke the others, my voice hoarse with panic. Jake checked the door, swearing it had been locked, while Sarah clutched Emily's arm, her face pale. We searched the cabin, every room, every closet, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of an intruder, just the open door and the lingering sense that we weren't alone. "It's just the wind," Jake said, but his voice was tight, and he kept glancing at the windows. The next morning, the storm had cleared, leaving a heavy fog that clung to the trees like a shroud. We decided to leave, to pack up and get out before anything else could happen. But when we went to the cars, my heart sank. All 4 tires on each vehicle were slashed, the rubber torn in jagged, deliberate cuts. Jake cursed, kicking at the gravel, while Sarah started to cry. Emily just stared into the fog, her expression unreadable. "We need to get to the main road," she said. "There's a gas station a few miles out. We can call for help." We set out on foot, the fog so thick it swallowed the cabin behind us within minutes. The forest was silent, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. We stuck close, our footsteps muffled, the air damp and cold. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that woman again, her pale face looming out of the mist. But there was nothing, just the endless gray and the distant hoot of an owl. An hour into the walk, Sarah stopped. her face ashen. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I strained my ears, and there it was, a faint rustling like footsteps pacing us just out of sight. We called out, thinking it might be an animal, but the sound stopped, only to start again moments later, closer now. Jake shouted into the fog, his voice echoing, but no one answered. The rustling grew louder, circling us, and then I saw it, a shadow moving through the trees, too tall, too fast. My blood ran cold. "Run!" I hissed, and we bolted, crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes. We didn't stop until we reached the gas station, a rundown building with flickering neon signs. The attendant, an old man with deep-set eyes, listened to our story with a strange calm. "You saw her, didn't you?" he said, not a question but a statement. He told us the woman wasn't just a ghost. She was a hunter, bound to the road by rage, luring people into the forest to share her fate. "She doesn't just want her killer," he said, his voice low. "She wants anyone who crosses her path." We called a tow truck, but as we waited, Emily pulled me aside. Her hands were shaking, her eyes wide with something like guilt. "I didn't tell you everything," she whispered. "Last year I was on that road. I saw her too. I thought I hit something, someone. But when I stopped, there was nothing. No body, no blood. I didn't tell anyone because I thought I was crazy." Her voice broke. "What if it was her? What if she's following me?" Before I could answer, the lights in the gas station flickered, and the air grew heavy, like a storm was brewing inside. The old man froze, his eyes darting to the windows. Outside, the fog seemed to pulse. And then I saw her, standing just beyond the glass, her pale face pressed against it, her too wide smile gleaming. Sarah screamed, and Jake grabbed a tire iron, but the attendant just shook his head. "You can't fight her," he said. "She's already dead." The lights went out, plunging us into darkness. The last thing I heard was that guttural hum, closer now, inside the room, and the sound of glass shattering as the world turned to chaos. Thank you for listening. Hope I didn't scare you too much. If you like my stories, please consider giving me a like and subscribe. See you next time.